Hello and welcome back to Directly Current, the podcast all about the intersection of electric vehicles and politics in the United States. I'm Max Patton. Today I'm speaking with Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat in the House who represents California's 17th District, better known perhaps as Silicon Valley. He's serving his fourth term right now. He's pretty popular. And in addition to being a progressive, he's also a pro-business Democrat and has literally written a book on American manufacturing. He was a major influence in the CHIPS Act under the Biden administration, major legislation in terms of the semiconductor industry. But electric vehicles also entail lots of manufacturing and lots of American jobs. A quick note before we begin, this was recorded the day after Trump's inauguration, so when you hear Representative Khanna make reference to the speech, he's talking about Trump's inauguration speech. We'll start the conversation off with the famous, maybe infamous, General Motors factory in Fremont, which was an abandoned facility before it was taken over by Tesla, who has, of course, since used it to start their EV empire and still produces many, many vehicles there. So let's jump into it.
Well, it's something I care deeply about. Fremont, where I live, and in the heart of my district, manufactures about 500,000 Teslas every year. It's a huge source of EV manufacturing. Lucent is there as well, and near Fremont, and Rivian it got a start in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley is critical to the EV technology innovation. If you listen to President Trump's speech yesterday of American ingenuity and America conquering the frontier and America moving forward, all sounds well and good, other than when you realize that he's stuck in the 19th century, when his idea of that is manifest destiny in America conquering lands and colonial acquisition. To move forward, if that frontier spirit in the 21st century is for America to win the green energy race, for America to lead in solar and electric vehicles and batteries, and that's what the Biden administration was doing. So the first thing is to try to protect the incredible unleashing of investments in these new industries so that we don't just cede the entire new energy market to China. That's what's going to cripple American economic growth in the 21st century. In terms of states, what we need to do is, in California, continue to provide the incentives for electric vehicles and continue to build out the charging infrastructure to be a model state while we try to protect what President Biden achieved.
It's definitely a dramatic shift at the federal level in that industrial policy. And I like how you highlighted his speech. I think, like you said, the actual tenor of it, somewhat more optimistic than American Carnage 8 years ago, but still in some ways very regressive, not exactly forward on a lot of things, except maybe space, because now Elon Musk is heavily involved in administration. I know, of course, you worked closely with Musk in the past. Lots has changed. But considering that's in the fold at the federal level, do you think there's hope for maybe some cooperation or progress to get people joined on the mission of advancing industrial policy towards, say, EV manufacturing and American jobs there?
At the federal level or at the state level?
Cooperation, right? Like, for instance, let's say federal dollars going to help states or going to help companies establish plants like Rivian, California-based company, has done now in Georgia.
Unfortunately, that was the Biden administration policy. I think that Trump is going to try to take that away. And our challenge is the rhetoric, right? Because he says, I'm going to unleash American manufacturing. I'm going to open the frontiers. I'm going to have this unshackle America spirit and build things again. And it all sounds rhetorically soaring until you look at what he's actually proposing. And his idea of doing this is to try to take back the Panama Canal and take back Greenland and provide tax breaks for the very wealthy. And he's not talking about actual investments that are matched with the private sector and are market sustainable to build new industry. And that's what it would actually take. In fact, he's mocking that. He's mocking the Green New Deal. Well, all the Green New Deal is saying is that we want new steel plants, we want new aluminum plants, we want new battery plants, we want new electric vehicle plants, and that this happens to have lower carbon footprint than China and also will reindustrialize our nation. But I don't think Trump is going to be for that. He has made it clear that not for those kind of federal investments. And our job, in my view, as Democrats or as people who believe in a role for government in the economy, is to make the case that we need to do that to compete with China's $670 billion investment a year in these emerging technologies.
Their foot has been to the floor when it comes to accelerating those technologies, and you're seeing them, case in point, dominate in solar, in EVs. But that all being said, your district in particular, and all of California, really has been a hotbed for lots of innovation. I don't, think that's going to change. In fact, I think the devil's advocate argument from the other side is that a pro-business environment might make that easier. The politics of your district are complicated, I think, right now. There's obviously huge wealth disparities at play and lots of other things going on. What do you think it looks like, particularly more locally in your district and parts of Silicon Valley, towards looking at innovating in a green new economy, even amid a president who is somewhat hostile to that?
Well, if we look at what gave rise to Tesla, it was partly the Obama administration. I remember when Elon Musk was begging Hannah Eshoo, who was a representative at the time from Silicon Valley, to help make sure that he got the loan from Tesla, from Treasury, for $400-some million. And that was an Obama administration program. And it was the Obama administration with Ash Carter that helps him get SpaceX to compete with Boeing and Lockheed on the ULAs that gives rise to SpaceX. Yes, my district has really been the hotbed for clean tech innovation. But a lot of that has been driven by government incentives, government purchasing agreements, government loans that have made that possible. What do I think it is going to continue? Yes, because the foundation has been so strong in terms of the investments that the CHIPS and Science Act made, that the IRA made, that the Obama administration made, and that has unleashed a lot of venture capital. And then you have visionaries like John Doerr, who fund, and Vinod Khosla and climate, and others who are going to continue to fund this. My fear is that if you don't have government incentives, government purchase agreements, government support for scaling, that the pace of it could slow down, and it puts us at a disadvantage with China, especially when it comes to the deployment of EV charging stations. And that's something that I know personally is the biggest limitation to adoption, is this range anxiety. Until we can have EVs be as easy to charge anywhere as cars are to fill up a tank, you're going to have consumers hesitate. And so we need to continue to advocate for as much strong government private sector partnership in this space.
From a messaging perspective, I think the concern that a lot of Americans would have and still have around the green technologies is a partisan angle, that electric vehicles, having a charging station in your garage, that's for someone in Palo Alto, that's not for me. And I don't know exactly why that is. We could have a whole many-hour conversation about how that happened, but how do you think House Democrats and Democrats overall, like yourself, can advance the message that this isn't just a liberal progressive thing? It may be that too, but it's in particular beneficial for you. It is the future. How do you advance that messaging?
Well, I think the challenge was that Tesla and some of these cars started out as high luxury cars. And so it got the sentiment that, you had to be making well over six figures to afford one of these. Now the price keeps coming down. The biggest thing we can be doing, of course, is to bring the price of batteries down, because that's the biggest component cost of an electric vehicle. And that's what the Biden administration, the IRA, that was intended to do, to invest in that kind of fundamental research to bring the cost of batteries down, and to deploy charging stations so that you don't need a garage, that if you park your car outside, or if you're in an apartment complex, there are chargers there. If you park it outside, it's easy to go 10 minutes to get it charged, that there's accessible everywhere, and that it's just as easy as filling a gas tank. And we're far from that, achieving that. The problem is that if you just say we haven't achieved that, we're not going to invest, then it's a chicken and egg problem, and we have to just continue to invest in that.
Yeah, no, investment these things are very expensive. And I think you've seen some interest. You brought up China several times here. There's been efforts, not necessarily directly from California companies, but you saw Ford and some of the old Detroit stables try to look at establishing battery plants with, say, CATL or Chinese firms. And that obviously was looked skeptically at by the Biden administration regarding the foreign policy and our relationship with China. But do you think some kind of technological cooperation internationally maybe is necessary for us to catch up? Or how do you think, in terms of deal making, we might be able to come from where we are now to being in a more competitive and strong stance against China for batteries and EVs in particular?
I think that there is a lot of innovation in batteries taking place in my district to see how we move beyond lithium-ion batteries, solid-state batteries that may have greater energy storage capacity, that may be more cost-effective. Some of the leading work of that is actually happening in Silicon Valley, not in China. And what I would do is continue to invest in that. If the Trump administration asked me, what is our policy on China and EVs, I'd say, okay, do the tariffs so that they're not dumping it here. But we've got to have some comparative advantage to China. And that comparative advantage would be to come up with batteries other than the lithium-ion battery that is going to be more advanced, and that would give our country an advantage. And why not double down on that investment?
When it comes to scaling up, I think the U.S. we have a great education system. We have lots of talented people, both who are born here and who immigrate here, who work on these key technologies. But the issue potentially, and whatever you want to call this century that we have, is that scaling that up to manufacturing has been disappointing for many people with, let's say, blue collar jobs. And you literally wrote a book on manufacturing, so I know it's been a big messaging point for you. But how do you think the messaging of, okay, these frontier green technologies are being developed in areas like California, but they're going to benefit the entire country and they can create jobs? How do you think hammering that message home works?
You're the finger on the heart of the matter, and that is that we have been terrible at scaling. My whole book starts with Andy Grove, who was a former CEO of Intel, who says that Americans need to figure out how to scale. We can do prototype manufacturing, we can do innovation, but we haven't been able to scale. And as a result, it has hollowed out a lot of towns. Manufacturing may only be 8% of the workforce, but it's a huge multiplier effect, that in advanced technology, in creating wealth that can be spent locally in towns. So what we need to figure out is how can we have the government help partner with the private sector in market sustainable investments to scale new industry, new manufacturing, not just in EVs, not just in solar, but in new steel and new aluminum and new pill factories and new shipbuilding, so that there's wealth generated in communities that will be spent locally, like in Johnstown, like in Galesburg, like in Downriver, Michigan. And when people say these factories are going to have robots, yes, they will, and they're not going to create as many jobs as they once did, true, and manufacturing has a smaller workforce and most people are in service jobs, true, but what they can do is be engines of wealth generation in these local communities that leads to high-paying jobs and apprenticeships and opportunities for people who may not have a college degree. And that is, I feel that Biden got some of the policies right, but he was never able to articulate the role of government in dealing with the deindustrialization of globalization that happened and how we were going to rebuild our economy to compete with China's $1 trillion trade surplus and our massive deficit, and why rebuilding advanced manufacturing was going to be the best thing to turn around some of these communities. It wasn't just a messaging issue. It wasn't just, we didn't tell people that we had a plant coming up in Columbus, Ohio. It was a failure of us to articulate the role of government in a 21st century economy to have an economic renewal in places left out.
I think that's what the Green New Deal that you and other representatives signed on to was getting at. And of course, the messaging of that was also went up in flames in the media. But we saw many parts of that Green New Deal become live in the IRA, and still, I think, is the ambit of yourself and your colleagues. So towards advancing new legislation, is this a matter of, like, in timelines, okay, let's wait for 2026, 2028, maybe tides will change, or is this kind of the progress that could be made day by day? How do you think that can be done at a political level?
I think we've got to continue to harp on this future versus past distinction. Democrats want the American spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation and unleashing production and building things. We want it for the 21st century. That means that we're not just going to be drilling for the old stuff of oil. That means that we're not just going to be championing 19th century manifest destiny platforms, thinking that an Alexander the Great is possible in modern times. That means we're going to be realistic of what it's going to take to lead the 21st century against China and outcompete them on batteries, on solar, on wind, on new steel plants, on new aluminum plants, on a new industrialized economy that is decarbonized. And if Donald Trump is willing to actually make the federal investments in these areas that are needed, then we will work with him on it to create good, high-paying jobs. But if he is simply going to invoke this rhetoric and think that deregulation and tax breaks for the rich is going to create jobs in Johnstown or Paintsville, Kentucky, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, then we will point out that the rhetoric be inspiring to some, but there's no delivery. And the delivery requires a role for government investment in scaling. That's because the capital expenditure is too high. And if you don't have government invest for Wall Street, the capital expenditures are too high. And if you don't have either government purchase agreements or government investment, it's not going to happen. Trump himself understood this with Operation Warp Speed, where we had government commitments for the vaccines. And we need to really convince the American public that this is what it's going to take to turn their communities around, more than just bashing immigrants.
It's very flashy rhetoric, but at the moment, I think the substance is the most generous and charitable way I can put it is unclear with what a Trump administration is going to do with industrial policy. But shifting back into EVs in particular, California has, I think, played a very de facto role in setting emission standards for the country to, I think, the benefit of obviously the environment, but also people's wallets. Vehicles now are twice as efficient as they were 30 years ago on average, regardless of what their power source is. And then, of course, you have electric vehicles, which are substantially more efficient than any combustion engine. But there's been now a reaching of seeing some firms potentially, like maybe Toyota and maybe also the Trump administration, would be hostile to the idea of CARB standards and that. And there was a lawsuit, I think he was filed in 2017, and we may see stirrings of that again. So in terms of the state versus federal dynamic, how do you think California can maintain its place?
I think the legislature is looking at making sure that we have tax credits for consumer purchases of electric vehicles. That, to me, would be important. We have budget challenges, of course, especially with the horrific wildfires. We're going to have a lot of rebuilding to do, but to the extent that we can be supporting fundamental innovation, research and development in California on batteries, on electric vehicles, that is important. And to the extent we can continue to fund the charging infrastructure to come out across the state, that will be important. Because of the standards, we've already influenced consumer behavior and these companies' behavior. And it's good for the environment, but it's also helping us build these cars that are going to compete on a global market. Even if you didn't believe in climate change, which of course is a scientific fact, and someone told you that X% of the global cars are going to be EVs, and China is going to have a huge proportion of those global sales, wouldn't you say that America should have a huge proportion of those global sales? It just is a economic imperative for the future.
And then when it comes to bringing the future from where we are now to where other countries like China are, I think, still leading at the moment, the bipartisan wise, there's been support among your colleagues and Republican members to basically impose stronger tariffs towards not just Chinese vehicles, but vehicles running Chinese software, vehicles with Chinese batteries. And I think some people, maybe some of the pro-business contingent would say, okay, this is hostile to globalist trade and all that. What do you make of reckoning with the fact that domestically we need to kickstart our own new industrial revolution, but also we still have to be globally competitive with our peers or with our adversaries?
Look, I support tariffs in industries that are infant industries, which I would say electric vehicles are, and where we can't have it all hollowed out. I mean, this is Bolton and Lincoln. I mean, this is the American system of economic development. But what we have to recognize is that tariffs aren't enough. If Joe Biden had just said, I'm going to put tariffs on the EVs coming in from China, but I'm not going to fund the battery plants, I'm not going to have the electric vehicle tax credits, I'm not going to have government purchase agreements, I'm not going to have Buy in America provisions, then it would have been hollow. It was the comprehensive approach that really made it a success. And so the question for Trump will be, is he just going to harp on the tariffs, which may slow down our loss to the Chinese, or is he really going to work on building this market in the United States?
I think it's interesting that Tesla, which is incubated there, took up the Fremont factory. It's this kind of story of American revival, obviously hugely successful company. And yet Tesla not only has fingers in the US now, they're also a major competitor in the Chinese market. And Elon Musk, for all of the opinions he distributes about every manner of things on X or wherever, he's always reticent to say things about China. And there seems to be a interesting dynamic and relationship there. So are you worried about the fact that, our leading, arguably, electric vehicle company, definitely in terms of sales objectively, is so entangled with China?
Well, I think we definitely need transparency to make sure that they're not sharing their latest technology with the Chinese. But the reality is you can't have a total decoupling of the United States and China at this point, nor would we want a war with China, which would hurt global GDP by 30%. And we do want American companies to sell into the Chinese market. But we should be vigilant that that Tesla isn't sharing its latest battery or EV technology with the Chinese and shouldn't be having joint venture agreements with them. All of that said, I think that the way to compete with China, other than the tariffs, has to be a development of the latest technology here in the United States. There's only so much defense we can play by saying companies don't allow the Chinese to take your technology. The real way to stay ahead is to out-innovate China and then try to scale here in the United States.
On that defense and offense dynamic, I'd argue an area where the U.S. still very much is on offense would be, say, in semiconductor or chip design and development, right? We have NVIDIA, we have Intel, still very venerable firm, even though they're having challenges. Obviously, the CHIPS Act that you helped create was a bone to that industry. And I think that industry still globally is very competitive. We're doing export controls of China. So when it comes to connecting the dots between the success the U.S. has had in silicon, in particular, the design of very advanced chips, graphics cards, AI things, all of that, how do you think we can translate some of that formula towards electric vehicles, whether it be through legislation or other forms of policy? What do you think are some of the success elements that played into chips?
I think, again, the similarities is that we had huge success in innovation and design in semiconductors, but lacked the ability to keep the production here. And on electric vehicles, my understanding is a lot of the initial technology and design came from the United States. We led. What China is clever at and has always been good at is taking that innovation and scaling it and having mass production at cheap prices. That has been a weakness of ours in the semiconductor industry, where we lost a lot of it to Taiwan, and now a weakness of ours in the electric vehicle and solar industry. And so what the across the board lesson is, America needs to do scaling better and manufacturing better. What has happened is we've run these massive trade deficits and had in turn capital account surpluses, because it has to balance. Capital account surpluses means the currency is coming into Wall Street, into our treasury bonds and financial institutions. That's given a huge boost to the financial sector, whose profits have doubled. But our manufacturing firms have had their profits cut in half and have had wages decline relatively in terms of the growth because of the competition overseas. And so this has contributed to the financialization of our economy and this massive income inequality, with people in places left out. And what America needs to do is to reverse that we need to say, no, we are going to be a great wealth-producing nation also in manufacturing, not just in finance, also in technology. And we're going to do this across critical strategic industries: semiconductors, electric vehicles, shipbuilding, aluminum, steel, pill making, and that we're going to do it across the country. And so I don't think it is particular to one industry or the other. It just, in my view, across the board, we tend to be pretty good at the research, the development, the innovation, but have not done a good job of keeping the production and manufacturing. And the big lesson of globalization is you can't just be a purely knowledge economy.
And my last point here for you is just giving you an opportunity towards looking at this new year, new presidential administration, another 2-year cycle, of course. what are you looking potentially forward to in terms of working with your colleagues on, or perhaps playing defense on, in terms of advancing everything we've talked about today in the next, let's say, 2 years?
The Democrats, we have to continue to articulate this vision that we actually can unleash American economic growth, dynamism, revitalization in places across America, and to continue to make that case, to not back away from it. And if the administration is willing to fund new steel plants, new electric vehicle, battery, we need to talk about how we will partner with them on doing it. But where they're going to be taking away electric vehicle tax credits, grants for battery or solar, where they're going to be moving backwards and saying we can just be self-sufficient on drilling, when oil production was at record highs under Joe Biden, but there has to be an approach that also is renewables, if they're just focused on oil, then we need to call them out and say, this isn't the future. And we need to call them out not just about climate. We need to call them out about what it's going to take to build a modern economy that the rest of the world looks up to, and why we don't want to fall behind on that. And I think the challenge for the Democratic Party is to, more broadly in the next 2 years, to put forward a compelling economic vision, to get all of these pieces that Biden had in motion, CHIPS, IRA, and try to simplify it into a sense of this is why this is going to put more wealth in the pockets of your community, your town, why it's going to give your kids a better shot, why it's going to unleash American economic growth, and take that away from Trump. But is concerning about him is the flashy rhetoric. He's appealing to this kind of frontier spirit. If you talk to people in Silicon Valley who voted for him, they say, oh, he gets the American spirit of excellence. Excellence isn't going back 100 years. Excellence is inventing the future. And our party needs to be the party that not only does that, which I think Biden and Secretary Buttigieg and transportation, others tried to do, and Gina Raimondo, but actually articulates that in a way that starts to resonate across this country.
Drill, baby, drill gets audience cheers, but it can't exactly argue it's progressive policy. So thanks so much for your time, Representative, and yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
All right, that's a wrap on our time this week. Thanks again to Representative Khanna and everyone at his team for making this episode possible, as well as, of course, you, listeners. You can subscribe to Directly Current on your podcast app of choice or on YouTube to get episodes every 2 weeks where we're going to talk with decision makers, folks in the elected office, journalists, analysts, everyone who is a mover and shaker in this EV transitioning happening at a very interesting moment for U.S. policy with this presidential administration and all of the federal and global headwinds that are coming our way. We have plenty of data in the meantime and very interesting stories and polls coming on the American EV Jobs Alliance front. You can follow all of that at evpolitics.org. We'll link that in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. I'm Max Patton. This has been Directly Current, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.